Welcome, everybody. My name is Evan Bradley. I'm one of the partners of Campbell Property Management, and I also work very closely with some of our largest association clients on the issues facing their associations. Uh, we are a full-service property management company. For those of you not as familiar with Campbell, we've been in business since 1953, and we serve over 400 condominium and HOA clients from Dade counties up to Port St. Lucie counties. So what I'm going to cover today is hurricane preparedness. It might be a little basic for some of you, but I think we have a lot of new residents who have recently moved to Florida. And when I was looking through the Q&A, I think there's some misconceptions about hurricanes and hurricane season. So we're going to try to cover everything from the basics to some more advanced ideas. And at the end, there will be a Q&A. So please use the Q&A feature of Zoom if you'd like to submit a question. Please do keep the questions only relevant to the course material. Questions about your specific property and your specific situation are going to be beyond the scope of our presentation, and we're not going to be able to get to those today. And again, this is not professional legal advice or professional or legal advice. It's a discussion about hurricane prep. If you have specific questions or concerns, please consult your property management team and or your legal team. So again, thank you all for joining. Let's get into a little bit about hurricane season. So officially, when is hurricane season? It's June 1 through November 30th, but that does not mean there cannot be hurricanes outside that time frame. There have been outlier storms both in May and in December. If you take a look at this chart, this is charting the number of hurricanes and tropical storms over the last 100 years. You can see that there's the activity is not uniform throughout the season. There's clearly a large peak of activity. Starts around the beginning middle of August and ending around end of October. That's when we're at the most risk here in South Florida. I think something that we really need to keep in mind is that we have so many new owners here in Florida, people who've moved down in the last just 2 or 3 years. Really, the last direct hit from a hurricane here, for those of you who've been here for some time, was October of 2005. So that was 17 years ago. So think about your community, think about your neighbors. How many people have moved here how many of your neighbors moved to Florida in the last 17 years? So a lot of people have not experienced a direct hit. So I think preparedness and preparation and communication is more important than ever. Unfortunately, NOAA has released a hurricane forecast for 2022. They are predicting another very active season with 19 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. Last year, I think we were somewhere in the neighborhood of 21 storms with 9 or 10 hurricanes and 4 major hurricanes. So again, potentially another very active season, and we do need to be aware of that. Some recent near misses, but storms we actually did have to prepare for here in South Florida. If you were here during the time, you probably had to put your shutters up and bring in your outdoor furniture. We had Matthew, Irma, and Dorian in 16, 17, and 19. Again, but if your staff is new, your staff and your owners are new over the last 2 to 3 years, they may not have helped prepare your property for any storms yet. And although you may have a plan or an idea of what you want to do in place, if they haven't done it, that's a concern. So again, remember, we talked about middle of August to middle of October is peak hurricane season. You can see the last 3 near misses were all Category 5 storms. That is the most serious of hurricanes with winds well in excess of 150 miles an hour. Extremely concerning. And so our last 3 nearest misses could have been potentially very devastating. Evacuation orders were issued for some of these. In Matthew, 1.5 million people were asked to evacuate. We were expecting a South Florida landfall, and the eye got within 60 miles of West Palm. Irma was 2017. I think many of you are familiar with Irma. There was a lot of wind damage in the area, even though it was not nearly a direct hit, but it was expected to hit South Florida just 24 hours out. 6.5 million people were asked to evacuate for that storm on both coasts. And it did end up coming ashore in the Keys, and it really was devastating down there in the lower Keys, if anyone saw what happened down there. Then in 2019, we had Dorian, which was completely devastating to the northern Bahamas, the areas around Marsh Harbor and the Abacos. We were under hurricane warning, and the eye did reach within 100 miles of West Palm. That storm had winds in excess of 200 miles per hour. So we've been fortunate, but we also need to be prepared. So Irma was probably the one that we all remember the best, those of us that were here. For those of you that weren't, 6.5 million people were asked to evacuate, and everything east of Federal Highway in Dade, Broward, Palm Beach counties was a mandatory evacuation zone. But then as the storm shifted, it looked like it was going to hit the West Coast. And then there was evacuations on the West Coast. So really no side of the peninsula was safe. Hotel rooms everywhere from Orlando all the way through Georgia and even parts of South Carolina were fully booked. Traffic was beyond congested, in areas around Orlando. And as people were trying to get out of the state, gas stations were running out of gas. Owners who were new to Florida were not clear what the role of the association was versus their role as owners. Some people were not as prepared with the communication as they needed to be because of the lack of near misses and storms that we've had. And many of the residents who were here had never been through a hurricane before, and either didn't know what they needed to do or didn't give themselves enough time to do some of the things they needed to do, and they were caught a little bit off guard. Again, so we're very fortunate that Irma was not a direct hit. So I think the reason you all are here is let's talk about what can we do to be better prepared. So the first thing is planning. Every single property should have a hurricane plan. Your plan is critical. So you create the plan, you practice the plan, and then you improve the plan. So what's in a good hurricane plan? We have templates in place for our clients that we tailor to each community. They're extremely comprehensive. Unfortunately, they are proprietary because of the amount of work that goes into it. So I can't just distribute those, and they're unique to each property. But the idea is you have to think about all the areas of your association, think about all your physical property, think about all of the information that you're going to need to communicate to owners both before and after the storm, and think about how are you going to function both before and after the storm. What are the roles of your employees? What are the roles of the board members? Who's going to be in town? Who may not be in town? And you really need to think through every aspect of what could happen. Part of a good hurricane plan doesn't just include how you're going to secure your physical property. It also includes information templates to get out to owners both before and after the storm. Once you have a thorough plan in place, practice your hurricane plan. I can't stress this enough. Do you know how long it takes to secure your property? Do you have enough staff necessary to complete it? Do you even have staff? Some smaller HOAs or condos may not actually have full-time staff. So where are you going to source labor from to put up shutters, to bring things inside? Well, how are you going to handle it when some of your owners are out of town, and although they are responsible for their own properties, ultimately just don't take care of their responsibilities? You may need to have extra labor to help address some of these things that the owners don't address. Do you have all the fasteners you need? Do the shutters actually slide? I know a community that they had hurricane shutters. They were all ready to go. They went to prepare for one of these storms. They went to where they keep the shutters, and lo and behold, shutters weren't there. Someone had either stolen them or sold them for scrap, but they checked on their shutters 3 days before the storm, and they didn't have any. And no one had looked for them for the 8 months prior. So pull all of your emergency equipment out now. Check on your shutters, your fasteners, your generators, your emergency lights, your flashlights, batteries, all these things. Pull it out, test it, make sure it works, and make sure you have it. And if you don't have labor, think about where will you get labor in the event that you need it. So what should you be doing right now, as hurricane season approaches? If you don't have a plan, obviously you need to create one. If you have a plan and you haven't practiced it or you haven't checked on your equipment, you need to do that. Having your trees trimmed, have your coconuts removed. There's ways to trim trees that'll help let the wind flow through the trees better. Coconuts obviously can become missiles in any sort of storm where the winds get over 75 miles an hour, and that can cause even greater property damage on your property. One lesson we learned in Irma that was really critical was the landscaping debris problem. There was an enormous amount of landscaping debris, trees that came down, different things that happened from Irma when the winds got up to about 70 miles an hour here. And some particularly larger HOAs, they had just mounds and mounds of debris. Where are you going to put this amount of debris? It took some places 4, 6, 8 weeks to actually get the debris cleaned up. And you have to think of where on your property can you keep literally tons of landscaping debris for up to 6 months, and think about that in advance. Have you talked to your landscaper about how you're going to clean up after a storm? Everybody, wants to get involved in the cleanup process, and the pricing for cleanup can become astronomical. And you're going to have fly-by-night companies and 2 guys with a chainsaw in the back of their pickup truck show up. You'd like to try to use a reputable vendor that you already have a relationship with, and you'd like to know what your pricing is going to be before there's an event, not after, because after, I promise, you're probably going to get gouged. So talk to your landscaper about, what will they charge you after a storm, and try to get an agreement in place so that you're first in line to get cleaned up, and that someone reputable and insured is on your property versus a fly-by-night guy. Same goes for condominiums with restoration. Do you have a restoration company on call? Do you have any sort of pre-hurricane agreement with a restoration company that they will be able to provide you tarps, and water and remediation tools and different things? Again, if there is a bad storm here, everybody is going to need those things, and there likely will not be enough to get around. But you can get on the list of some of these companies, and they have a finite amount of equipment that they've allocated to their associations that have contracted with them. And it's certainly a good idea to be prepared for. Another thing you need to consider is your sensitive information. Have you backed up? Everyone should be taking before photos of their property. That's something you should be doing right now. Take pictures of the roof, take pictures of the common areas, take pictures of the exteriors of the community. These are the most important thing you can have in the event that you need to place an insurance claim, so you can prove that the damage was directly as a result of the storm. So make sure you have those photos. And once you have them, make sure they're stored someplace where you can have access to them after the storm. Cloud storage is probably the best way to go, whether it be through Dropbox or some other online service that you can access from anywhere. If you're just storing those photos on the PC there in your on-site office or at a board member's house, you're certainly running the risk of that computer getting damaged, stolen, whatever it might be, and now you've lost one of your most important keys to filing an insurance claim. Same thing with your insurance policies, any sensitive information. Another thing we see that can potentially be a concern is a lot of communities have an older data access system because it works and no one's really needed to change it, or it's expensive to upgrade, and it may be just sitting on an old Windows PC in the manager's office. If that's not backed up, if that is not in the cloud somewhere, and water gets in the office, you may lose all of your data access security information if that computer gets damaged. Make sure you understand how is that information stored, where is it stored, and back it up to the cloud, because that could really be difficult to overcome after a storm if you lose all that information. So communication is key. This is another thing that you should be doing right now. How and when should you communicate with your residents? Early and often. Our experience is that newer owners in Florida are either uninformed of their responsibilities to secure their own properties, or they're expecting concierge level service from their association, particularly in a condo, that you're going to do it all for them if they're out of town. So now some properties do that, and some properties offer that service, but a lot don't. And owners are often confused. So start communicating responsibilities of owners now, and set expectations well in advance, so that if someone needs to hire a company to put up their shutters because they're not going to be here, or reach out to a neighbor who can check on their property if they're out of town and a storm does come, they need to make those arrangements now. Waiting to inform the residents of their responsibilities after a named storm has us in the forecast cone, it's going to be way too difficult for these owners, and they're going to get frustrated and upset. How did I not know this a month or two ago when I could have addressed it, versus now you're telling me? So figure out what your owners what's expected of your owners. Create emails and put it in your newsletter and post it conspicuously, be it at your elevators, front desk, package pickup areas, wherever it might be. Create checklists for your owners so they know what they're supposed to do with their units in the event of a named storm bearing down on us. Some of the things that you'll find in the checklist, which I'll show you in a second: cleaning out your fridge, bringing in any items that can become projectiles. They are responsible for closing their own shutters. They should be taking before pictures of their personal property, and they should have someone local who can check on their property for them if they're an absentee owner. I can't stress how critical this is. After Irma, we were inundated with calls from people who were asking us to tell them the condition of their condo or single family home. You can imagine, as a management company with over 100,000 units under management, and dealing with the aftermath of a storm, our responsibility, and yours as an association, is to the common areas. We cannot be a concierge checkup service for every unit under management to relay to them the condition of their property. But this was an expectation of many absentee owners. So you need to stress now that they need to get in contact with somebody who can evaluate their property for them after a storm, and contact that individual, not management, not the association, not the board of directors. In the event that people do not clear their properties, the association may be forced to do it for them, and your documents may allow you to charge that owner for the service. But charging them is one thing. The problem with a storm like this is we may not have as much time as we need to secure the common areas and secure individual properties for residents who have not upheld their responsibilities. So again, early communication is key in getting these residents prepared, so that you minimize the amount of work on the association as much as possible. So again, create those lists now and start that communication now, so that if someone needs to brush up on some of these things for their personal property, they have the time to do it. So many of you who joined us today had a lot of questions about checklists and guides and different things. Each county has a very comprehensive hurricane preparedness guide. I've put up the links, and these will be in the materials that get sent to you, but a quick Google search will provide the links to these things, and they're usually PDF documents, anywhere from 40 to 60 pages, and they're very good. They include checklists for individual owners and property owners. They more importantly, they include very specific information how to help those with special needs, which is one of the more common problems in our age-restricted communities. Many people may not physically be able to drive or leave the area. They may need medicines, they may need other things. There are hotlines and shelters and transportation available for these type of people. So I suggest that you read through these guides, and as you're putting together your community's hurricane plan, that you incorporate the different hotlines and services available specific to your county in that communication to your residents. Again, if you are outside of Dade, Broward, or Palm Beach, just Google your county and hurricane plan, and one will come up. So evacuation planning. This was one that really jumped out at us with Irma. It was one of the most extensive evacuations ever ordered in Florida's history. And it created a whole set of problems. It was not only was it extensive, but then we also had people who wanted to stay. So what did we need to do? We figured out we needed to communicate the need for personal responsibility very early on. The association cannot be responsible for people who defy an evacuation order. And I think a lot of people didn't understand what it actually meant if we were going to go through with an evacuation order. That meant the heating and cooling systems for the buildings were going to be turned off. It meant that security was not going to be there. It meant that an HOA's gates were going to be left wide open. That it meant there was going to be no staff on site. In our barrier island communities, it meant that there was going to be no emergency services on the barrier islands. They were being pulled back to the mainland, the higher ground. So these are all very unique things that had really not happened. A lot of owners had not experienced before. And although people thought they wanted to stay, I don't think they fully understood what that meant. So if we started communicating to residents, if you really plan on staying, can you live in your condo unit without power and running water for 1 to 2 weeks? Do you have enough supplies to live 1 to 2 weeks without power and running water? Do you have enough medications to get through that time period? Are you healthy enough to live without AC in the hottest months of the year here, August and September, potentially without, are you healthy enough to live without AC in those months? We are not going to have any staff here. There's literally no one to help you. The elevators are going to be turned off. Can you get up and down a flight of stairs? Yes, buildings have generators, but there's no guarantee that, those generators will necessarily work depending on the amount of water damage, on a barrier island. And in the event they do work, how long are they going to run for? It's very risky if you're going to be, staying in a condominium building, east of Federal Highway in the event of a serious storm. And security is a huge issue. HOAs and condos are not, security staff is not going to stay at your building if there's a mandatory evacuation order. Those shifts are not going to be covered. So you have to consider that as well. Now, granted, some people always are going to stay. The association cannot force people to leave. That's not within your authority. The local police may try to do that if you're on a barrier island and the situation is serious enough. But in general, the association is not going to be able to force people to leave. But you can certainly strongly encourage them to leave by explaining what the reality is going to be here in the aftermath of a serious storm. So again, that should all be communicated early and often. So that means your residents should have an evacuation plan if they need one. They should consider where they're going to go and who they're going to stay with. Another huge issue is pets. If they're going to stay in a shelter, there are pet-friendly shelters. Again, if you go to those county guides, they will help you understand where those are and what you need to do to register. Some of the evacuation shelters do require pre-registration, particularly for those with special medical needs. And again, that needs to be done now. You can't wait for 3 days before a storm to register a spot. If you have need transportation or medical needs, you need to register well in advance. So again, there's a lot of things you can be doing now to help your community. So I just want to remind everybody, the last direct hit here was Wilma. This picture is actually from an office building that is in Dade County. This is that all that damage you see was Wilma damage. That was only a Category 2 storm, so winds around 100. I think that's what is that, about 95 to 110 miles an hour, something like that. And we felt Category 2 winds all through Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade counties with Wilma. This is going back to 2005. 3.2 million people without power. You could assume that number will be much higher now with the number of people who've moved here in the last 17 years or so. And power was not restored for up to 2 weeks in some areas. 55,000 homes, 3,600 workplaces damaged just in Palm Beach County, because we happen to have those statistics. So you can triple that probably for the Tri-County area. And again, those numbers would be dramatically higher given the an influx of people in the development we've had here. So very important to keep in mind that was only a Category 2 storm. So we can't get complacent. Some people say, oh, well, it won't be that bad. It's not a 3, it's not a major hurricane. Look at this building and understand what it would be like to stay in a building like this, for a Category 2 storm. Yeah. So that kind of concludes the the basics. I'm just going to check the Q&A here and see what this says. There's a few questions here. Someone asks, my lack of knowledge as it relates to saving information to cloud. How do you do that? So there's websites like Dropbox that provide. What cloud storage means, basically a website that will, with a username and password, you can save your information to, and it's hosted on servers and server farms in different areas of the country, and that you can access it via the internet from anywhere. So if you have, have somebody help you create an account for a service like Dropbox, you create a username and password, and then it'll teach you how to take a file from your local computer and drag it and drop it into the Dropbox, and then you can access it with that username and password anywhere you have an internet connection. I'm sure someone else in your neighborhood could probably help you do that. All right, next one. Is the association obligated to have a current roster of who is here versus who is away for the season, especially as it relates to disabled residents, or is it up to the unit owner? There is no obligation to keep a roster like that. There's no law around something like that. It's certainly a helpful practice to know who's going to be here and who's not, but it's very difficult. You're not going to get all of the owners to want to give you that information, either just through apathy or because they don't necessarily want everyone to know their business. It's going to be difficult. Again, it's all about, there's a lot about personal responsibility when we're dealing with a hurricane. I strongly recommend that you reach out to your owners now and inform them of what their responsibilities are and what's going to be expected of them. You cannot be going door to door and trying to help people get out in the event of a hurricane. Certainly you want to be neighborly, but it's the association has to worry about its own infrastructure and common areas. And you don't have the manpower nor the expertise to be physically helping disabled residents and residents with special medical needs and things like that. You need to help those people help themselves in advance by contacting these county services, reaching out to friends, neighbors, maybe home health care providers, whoever can help them with those things. Okay. So can you put up a homeowner list cleaner? So again, the list of things that a homeowner needs to do, you'll find those on the county guides. They have very extensive checklists. So I encourage you to go to your county guide and look up what the different responsibilities for the homeowners are. But yes, cleaning the refrigerators is a huge one, maybe arguably the most important one, because that can become a disaster if that's not been done and you have dozens of owners in a condo in that situation. I have addressed all of this woman's concerns, so happy to hear that. Condo emergency powers. Yes, so there are extensive emergency powers available to the board in the aftermath of a storm. I don't have those specifically written out. I'll include that in the next presentation. That would be a good slide to have. But the board can do certain things without necessarily having a board meeting, calling board meetings. They can make decisions somewhat unilaterally to protect the life, safety, and property. So that may include entering into contracts for restoration, for tarping, different things. If you need access to funds, it loosens the restrictions on how and when you can use your association funds. That it gives you a lot of leeway to make sure that you can secure and protect your property. And there is access to units and different things, all of the above. Remember, in the aftermath of a hurricane, your primary goal and your important fiduciary responsibility as a board member is to secure the property from a safety standpoint initially, and then from a property standpoint after that. So you need to do everything within your power to make sure whatever damage your building has incurred, that it does not get worse, and what's already a bad situation becomes a worse situation. So you use common sense, work through your property manager, work through your, again, talk to your restoration vendors in advance. They're going to have a lot of helpful thoughts in this area. But get out in front of these things and think about how are you going to secure your property from a safety standpoint and from a physical plant standpoint in the aftermath of a storm. Okay, so I think that's it. It was a little shorter today than normal, but hopefully you guys had some good takeaways. I think the most important thing is to look through your property, find your hurricane plan, practice it if you have it. If you don't have it, start creating it immediately, and think through how you're going to communicate with your owners, and start that process now here in May. And let's not wait for a named storm, because the more you're going to need your owners' help. You just don't have the staff necessary, no matter how big your association is, to address all the needs of the condo and or HOA and all of the individual owners' needs. So someone asks, what sort of liabilities does an HOA assume if they support a CERT operation. That's more of a legal question. I would defer that to your counsel. There are Good Samaritan laws and different things, so I'm not sure it's the amount of liability that you might think that I don't think you're taking on any additional liability, but again, I'm not really the person who should answer that. If you're concerned about actual legal liability, you should reach out to your association attorney. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate everybody's time today. And we will be sending out the slides via email after this. And this will also be posted to YouTube if you want to watch it again, or if you would like to have other members of your community see it who couldn't be here today. If you go to campbellevents.org, that's campbellevents.org, you will be able to see not only this webinar, but all prior webinars that we've done on various topics. Another thing I would encourage you to do is, if you are not subscribed to our newsletter, you can subscribe to it at getfan.org. That's getfan.org. That's where we publish industry specific news articles, blog posts, updates from Tallahassee, all sorts of things that are specifically relevant to property management in South Florida and the state of Florida. So we strongly encourage you to subscribe to that, and that we also push out any invitations to future classes through that system. So we do education really almost weekly here at Campbell, and everything from continuing education courses for property managers to classes like this, to legal updates and different things with attorneys. So a wide variety of course material is provided. So again, thank you all for coming today. I hope you had some good takeaways, and start communicating now. I can't stress it enough. So a lot of your owners are new. A lot of your owners have never experienced this, and a lot of them don't know what they need to do. So educate them as early as you can. Thanks, everybody.